Welcome back. So what we've done thus far, the first couple classes, I concentrated really hard on, here's a poem, let's understand it literally, because sometimes that takes work. Secondly, let's dig into it figuratively, because that's what we're doing in class. And then, maybe the 2 or so classes after that, we worked a lot on what goes into a paragraph. Now, what I want to say before we press on, we will spend some time next time on paragraph structure. What I mean by that is, I laid this out for you already, the 3 I's, topic, sentence, evidence, analysis. We did do that, but it was very brief. Part of the brevity was summer school is real fast. I mentioned that. And also, it's 11:02, and part of the class has to be built with 11:01 in mind. Like, I just have to assume you've done that at some point. Now, some of you have told me it's been a minute, but still. And I say that to say, if you recall from 11:01, this thing about topic sentences, and then evidence, and then, we still do that. We just haven't covered it as much, because again, it's supposed to be something you're familiar with. But we will talk about it next time. Because now, I want to talk to you about introductions, okay? And they're a little bit different. To begin with, as I grapple with this, as I define it, there are 4 parts to an introduction. And you guys know some of these. So I'll just ask, parts of an introduction. What do you feel pretty confident? Like, you know you have to have this. There's got to be one. You want a hook? Very good. Hang on. A hook comes up front. And I always put a question mark there because they're optional. You guys like to have them, by all means you can, but you don't have to. Okay? What's a hook meant to do? Hook the reader in, right? In the words of Dave Chappelle, gotcha bitch. I don't know if you're familiar with it. There's a sketch where he gets Oprah pregnant. Anyway, don't worry about it. Do you guys know how to hook a reader? What are some of the mechanisms?
Twist.
What do you mean? Like in a Shyamalan movie?
Asking a question.
A rhetorical question. A rhetorical question.
Or just any kind of question.
A legitimate question is harder because if it's something someone can answer, as soon as you answer a thing, you feel like you're done with it. Okay? Like, I'm trying to think of a question with a definite answer. If you started your paper with, have you ever had a banana? Your reader would either answer yes or no, most likely. And then they're like, well, I'm done with that. Like, there's no momentum, right? A rhetorical question puts a thought into your head, which allows for sort of elaboration, okay? So for instance, this is my favorite rhetorical question. If your mother, my favorite example, if your mother asks you some iteration of, did I ask for your opinion? What are you supposed to say? You say nothing. You say nothing. You say nothing. She's telling you to shut up, but she never said that. That's how rhetorical questions work. It doesn't actually want an answer. It puts a thought into your head without verbalizing that thought, okay? So rhetorical questions can be tricky, but they can work. A real question, I mean, again, there's exceptions to every rule, but would be harder to do. But you can ask a question, okay? Do you know any others? Really? I mean, that's kind of cool, but really?
Mm-hmm.
What a fucking joke this whole thing is. Oh. Alright, sweet. Rhetorical question. It can be an interesting fact, which I can't think of any. I told my son this morning, he's in a space camp, he's asking me about space. Jupiter is widely credited with protecting us from asteroids and the like, because it's so big, its gravity is so big, it sucks up a lot of the crap that's floating around. He was pretty impressed by that. That's an interesting fact. Anyway, not a lot to do with this class. What else? You can start with an anecdote, like a fun little story. Those are harder to do, especially in 3-page papers, because your story's got to be damn fast if you're going to do that. But I suppose you could. Anything else? I think that's it. There's something we're leaving out. It can't matter too much. All right. But that's a hook. What else do you need? You gave it to us. What was it?
Oh, the thesis.
Thesis. Where does that usually show up?
Last sentence.
Very good. If you're going to have a thesis, which you should, comes at the end of your introduction. You work your way to it. You're preparing me for it. What is a thesis anyway?
Overreaching argument.
With your chest, please?
The overreaching argument.
Of your entire paper. It's the argument of your entire paper, right? Your body paragraphs should somehow support, elaborate upon, help me understand that thesis. But your thesis guides the whole paper. Okay? Any thoughts on the other two? What they might be or need to do? Context. Good. The way I talk about it, I describe it as a roadmap. More on that in a minute, but yes, you need context. Last but certainly not least, whether or not you have a hook, you have to have this. Anybody know? That's a rhetorical question, which would function as your hook. You need to. Good. You have to introduce the text. Now, why do you do that? Well, have a hook if you want one. But you don't have to. You have to early introduce the text. In B.H. Fairchild's Body and Soul, we encounter some older men who tell us the story of playing Mickey Mantle in a Sandlot baseball game and getting their asses handed to them. That's an introduction to the text. We get the author, the title, and a brief, if colorful, summary. Sentence or two at the most, right? But you literally say what happens. This is easy. You can all do this, okay? But if you don't introduce the text, what will happen, because I see it happen every time this occurs, you will not talk about it. You'll talk about stuff related to it, but you will not talk about it, and that is a monumental problem. So introduce the text from the jump, okay? Thesis, we've talked about, and we will continue to talk about. Roadmap. You said context, I said roadmap. What it is, the reason I call it a roadmap, it should do two things, okay? The first, to get to your context, it should lay out for us in detail what we're going to encounter in the thesis, okay? A thesis statement, by its very nature, takes a lot of thoughts and puts them into a very small package, right? Like a sentence or two. But it's meant to guide 3+ pages. I mean, it's going to be doing a lot. So it's going to be kind of general, kind of vague, maybe. Roadmap is going to take each one of the bigger thoughts and break it down in a couple sentences, right? The other thing it does, and again, the reason I call it a roadmap, if your thesis is meant to guide your entire paper, and your roadmap is meant to explain your thesis, well, in some ways, then the roadmap should also help me know what I'm going to see in the paper, right? Say, for instance, 3-page paper typically winds up being about 5 paragraphs. Introduction, conclusion, 3 body paragraphs. Well, then your roadmap, if you devote 1 or 2 sentences, say, to each one of your body paragraphs, well, then it's going to be 3 to 5 sentences, something like that, right? And if your roadmap explains your paper, and if your thesis ties into your paper, and it all goes together in this perfect, just cohesive argument, you are going to impress the shit out of me. Or anyone who would read your paper. Because you've prepared them for the thesis, so I'm inclined to buy into whatever your argument is, right? And lo and behold, you've prepared me for everything that comes after. It's great. That's what these are meant to do. Any questions about any of that? Well, let's try to do it. You mother. Anyway, we've been talking about body and soul, so I'm assuming we're going to talk about it now. But I'm going to open the floor. Would you guys like to talk about it differently? Okay. We're going to leave off the hook right now, just because it can be harder than you think sometimes. So let's start with what we have to have. We're going to introduce the text. How do we do that to begin with? What do we need?
Something from the soul?
Title and author.
Title and author first.
I don't know.
Tell me what we're looking at. So, in B.H. Fairchild's Body and Soul. Now, sentence or two summary. How would you sum up the poem? The speaker. Is that all that happens?
However, the games also show their dissatisfaction in their lives.
You're getting a little bit into argument, which you can kind of do, but at best, I would argue there's a little more story we could have first. Like, we're missing some highlights.
Their game is changed when a boy shows them up.
And that boy happens to be
Mickey Mouse.
Mickey fucking Man, right? I've done legally that's his middle name. Yeah. However, playing baseball. Yeah, I'm worrying too much about it. All right. However, ill. I'm not in love with that sentence.
How about,
Go ahead.
however, their truth is exposed when the young kid named Mennel plays in the game?
You're trying to kind of, well,
Their truth is exposed?
okay. Well, all right, so however, the, you're too high and you're too specific, so it's like, the, this is really good. I don't know.
So yours is broad? Is that what you're trying to get to?
It's because what we don't want to do, I'm thinking in a rhetorical mode rather than an argumentative. You want to introduce your reader to the text, okay? And typically, if you start with a lot of like specific argument, you can kind of scare people away. It's the best way to know how to describe it, right? So like what you're basically doing here is offering like a little bit of an olive branch and saying, look, man, we're not getting into the weeds yet. This is story. This is plot. Like, just come with me for 2 sentences. I'm gonna make sure you know what we're gonna be talking about. It's easy, basically. After this, we're gonna get into argument, but you kind of suck them in. Especially if you have a hook too. It's like an on-ramp to your argument, is how I would talk about it, right? So we snuck a little bit in. This is argument, all right? But I can live with that, just a little bit. Okay. Anyway, now the hard part, actually. The roadmap, the argument, which you guys want to get to, so let's do it. What we got to do for this exercise, because there's no other way to do it, we're going to just kind of spitball elements of the poem that we might talk about in paragraphs. Okay? So for instance, one that we could definitely talk about, because we already have, is the business about, oh, my memory is awful, although you can kind of see it. Our fathers fall in love with their own stories. That stuff. Do you guys remember anything we said about that? Like, what did we end up saying about falling in love, or
They tend to only remember the good stuff, possibly bury the bad stuff. They live
Okay.
a finite amount of time.
all right? What did you say, Caleb?
Just like they're covering up the flaws.
Yeah, well, and it covering up might be the because at least we talk about like this part doesn't seem intentional, right? They can't help it, but they ignore them or they don't see them, like they're not capable somehow. These men fully but you don't help me there. Does that make sense? Like, I think that's kind of getting at what we're saying. I could make it bigger for you. We're basically saying, because again, we're alluding to what this paragraph would end up being. And to my online crowd, I'm pointing to the board that I erased earlier because the world we live in is imperfect. But if we're going to write that paragraph about falling in love with their own stories, not being capable of depicting it or even maybe thinking of it accurately, I'm alluding to that here. In the very telling of the story, it's made clear that they can't quite wrap their heads around what it means, right? That's the truth he's talking about. What does this mean? What does it say about them? And they're like, nah, not doing that, right? Even though the speaker feels like it's obvious. He says it's just back there behind the Hollis Chalmers, it's right there. Okay. We could continue that thought, but that's enough for now, because I really want to save time for this. We got to make this up on the fly. What's another part of the poem we might talk about, think about? And you can pull up the poem if you need to. Because if this is 3 pages, and like I told you, it's probably going to be about 5 paragraphs for all of you, you need at least 3 things. Their home life. Okay. Are you thinking of anything specifically? Yeah, you're good. This stuff about white rent houses and Broken Kenmore, is that stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're like quite yelling.
Yeah.
My wife's complaining about money as well.
Okay.
So it shows that they don't have a perfect home life.
To put it mildly. Okay. Well, let's push on that a little bit. And we talked about this some. Why could we argue, right? And what we're thinking of now is the paragraph we will write, right? Because we're going to kind of sum it up here. And then when it gets to the body paragraph, we have a lot more time to tease all this out. But specifically, I think the language that we keep kind of latching onto, little white rent houses. Even, we didn't talk a lot about little. Well, you don't need that, dog. White rent houses is enough. Why little? You know? Well, yeah, but it just feels like a dig, you know? It's like, all right, man. The little white rent houses, wives complain about broken Kenmores. Money in broken Kenmores. Why does the speaker tell us that stuff? In what way is their home life less than ideal, specifically?
What the speaker says they rent for one.
Yeah. Why does it matter that they rent?
They don't own.
Why does that matter? It's cheaper, but it's also less.
Dignified.
Yeah, I was gonna go with stable, but also it's a marker of like lower social class, lower economic class, right? Why does any of that matter to these guys? Why do they care?
Their pride is basically all they have.
They're what?
Their pride is basically all they have.
Pride is what?
And
No, I'm saying, but their pride as what? Like,
Men,
okay,
providers.
okay. So again, we're back to that narrative, right? That they feel like, at least we think they feel like this, we're probably going to have to prove it, have to talk about it. But we feel like that narrative is very important to these guys. And yet, we see this like flip side in their home life that it's not really working out. Yeah, for sure. Okay. In part, I gotta stop doing that. All right, I'm at a sidebar real quick, and I apologize, but if I don't point it out to you now, I'll forget. We all have tics when it comes to our writing, T-I-C-S. It's a thing you do because you're very comfortable with it. So when pressed, like I am when I'm writing in front of you on the fly, you'll automatically do it. One of my tics is introductory clauses. That's one, and that's one. All of our sentences thus far have begun with introductory clauses. And I was about to say, in part, comma. It's another introductory. You don't necessarily notice you're doing it, but a reader will, because it's repetitive. I just want to point that out to you. So I'm going to intentionally not do an introductory clause here. God help me. Anyway, so we're talking about how they can't nail that narrative. They can't make it work somehow, right? They feel like they failed as men. How are we going to do that? Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to do with in part. But like, we do it this way. Something like that. What we'd have to do here, a sentence wasn't enough. We haven't really made this an argument, okay? Because you can get that just from reading the poem. Why does this matter? That they fail as men in this regard. Why do we care? Why is it worth talking about? I mean, well, I don't know that they're failing because they're accomplishing a lot of the man stuff in other regards, right? Like they have the hard job, they drink after work. On their downtime, they play baseball. Like, you know, they're not complete failures. Is all I'm saying.
No, but I'm saying like they're failing at the bigger aspects.
You know?
They're like a home, for instance, is something that's probably more important than drinking with friends, and they're failing at the home life.
The job is pretty important. Huh?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, even if we were to do that, I don't know what we could accomplish by saying that like they're failing at it, because we've already said that. you kind of accidentally brought up an interesting thing, though. What you're doing is trying to find a parallel, right? You said they fail at home like they fail in the game. Okay. Well, what are the implications of that? If we're tying their failures in their home life to their failures in baseball, what might that suggest about their home life? Not as hard as you think, I promise. They fail the game, they fail at home. What are we? This is one of those SAT comparisons, analogies. If,
They're not happy?
sure. If game is to home as failure is to, I'm fucking that up somehow.
You're just confusing me more.
I know. Hold on. We'll do it better. We're saying they failed at the game, and they're failing at home. Therefore, we are implying what about home? It's what?
It's a game.
It's a game.
It's a game. With rules. Right? Like, again, there's a pejorative sense of game that we may or may not need to apply here. But really, all a game is just, there's a set of rules, we all play by it, and they're losing according to those rules. Right?
In that aspect, then their whole life is a game?
Maybe. Again, like, because it's a set of rules, right? And if you think about it, they have lived according to what they're supposed to do, just like they did when they didn't pitch around Mantle. They lost, right? Yeah, for sure. Oh god, on the field, it took me a second. I'm not a baseball fan, so like, do they call it field?
Yeah.
They do.
It's the diamond.
Yeah, that's too fancy. But yes. And much like their failures on the field, there's another instructor clause for you. That's good enough for me. All right. By the way, I think we got some traction now all of a sudden. We're kind of heading somewhere with this whole their life is a game business. But anyway, we need one more, at least, element of the poem. We've talked about the very beginning with fuck my life, falling in love with their own stories, right? And then we move to the money, broken Kinmores. All this is in the first stanza, by the way. What's one other aspect of this poem we could talk about? I got one in my mind right now I think we have to talk about, but we may not. You're going to talk about this poem. And it seems like in part we're talking about being a man. You gotta talk about this. It's in I hate giving hints because it makes it feel like elementary school, but like it's in the second half of the poem. It's there. Huh? Yeah, where do we talk about that?
When they were describing why they didn't walk.
They did not. Because the idea of being a man in the eyes of their fathers and everyone else had cost them too goddamn much to lay it at the feet of a 15-year-old boy. I think I also left out living through a depression and a war. That's pretty big. That's intense. But doesn't it, especially, I would argue, and again, this is argument, this is in a paper, goddamn, that's how these guys would say it, right? So you could argue the speaker's doing his best to give us a glimpse into their heads. Like if you had them against a wall and had them demanded, why didn't you pitch around this kid? If you dug deep enough, that would be the answer they would give you. Right? We gotta talk about that. We have to. You know? It's kind of long. In memory, it's like a couple lines. 2, 3, 4. Oh my goodness. You probably, in a paper, could not cite all of that. You just could not do all of that in a paragraph. It's kind of big. But you can paraphrase. And you can talk about some of it. If you guys need help, we're on the very last page of the poem, okay? It's, excuse me, if you're looking at that last page, it's round about halfway through that stanza, okay? And it starts with, because they had gone. That's how the line starts. And then it's the next 3 or 4 after that. Really quick, if we're gonna dig into any of that language, and we could dig into a lot of it actually, what do you guys think we might talk about? It says they've gone through a depression and a war that had left them with the idea that being a man in the eyes of their fathers and everyone else had cost them too goddamn much just to lay it at the feet of a 15-year-old boy. I mean, we might get, but I'm saying, slow down before we get there. You guys do this. This is why I keep pumping the brakes on you. Talk to me about language first. What are we going to look at specifically in this line?
I think it's kind of like what you was talking about earlier, the 3 points.
Well, again, what are you looking at in the line for me? Help me out. What language are we going to use?
You lay it at the feet of man.
Okay, that's pretty powerful. We can talk about that. What does that phrase mean? First of all, I guess, what are they laying at the feet of this 15-year-old boy? Yes, but then metaphorically,
3 tests.
yes,
Their manhood.
their manhood. They say it. They had done all this with the idea that being a man. And then we go for a bit and we say just to lay it at the feet. Their idea of being a man, according to the speaker, if they walk him now, they're basically setting it down in front of him. You take it. Right? Yeah. Okay. And that phrasing, lay it at the feet of, what does that mean? What does that look like? What does that do to these men if they're
Below the.
they're lowering themselves, but below him?
They're less than him.
They're less than him. Can't do that, right? All right, let's get that down first. Well, yeah, I gotta stop right. Hold on. So they consciously decide to lose by not walking. Is that fair? At something more important to them. I think I've already said the man's, but the man's masculine ideals. Let's push on that a little bit. Why would it put them beneath manhood if they walked to these men?
Mantle hadn't yet earned his masculinity.
Say what now?
Mantle hadn't yet proved his masculinity. He didn't have to do the struggle stage.
And so to walk him would be doing what? Like, why would that?
It'd be admitting defeat.
Admitting?
It would be admitting that he's actually good.
Better.
Like showing that he's
He's
better.
more of a man than they are.
Yeah, maybe. Okay. So, the introduce or replace of anything in the hierarchy, it would be admitting defeat. I have linguistically forced us into a big question, which is why? Why is admitting defeat a sin? That's a hell of a word, but I meant it. To these men, why? To admit defeat.
You don't do that as a man, not after going through the depression, after the war,
Why? What would admitting defeat in any of those situations?
giving up.
But what happens if you give up in a depression or a war?
You're strained.
You die or.
I mean, nothing good, right? So are we, I'm asking, are we on some level talking about survival? Huh?
Vaguely.
If these
Vaguely. Look, depression and a war, those are survival moments. Those are
I
crises.
think that's what-
Well, but all of this is intentional. To stop for 1 second. Here's what I mean. The guy that wrote this poem, I'm not saying he had it all planned out from the start. It is very rare that happens. But at some point he went, this baseball is really important to these guys. This game. Why? What kind of guys are they? Okay, we find that out. What else is important to them? We find that out. And then he goes, well, the game is so damn important. And all this other stuff is, might they have anything else in common? Right? So while we're not saying literally, probably, whether or not they win this fucking baseball game is like a matter of life and death. We're not saying that. Metaphorically, I think we might be. Okay? Because that's why he invokes depression and war. He brings it up, like he wants you thinking about it. So those are legitimate, literalize is the word I want, moments of survival. Like if you give up in a war or in a depression, well, you probably kind of fucked. Okay? So they didn't do it there. They didn't, right? They did not. They did not walk him. They did not give up there either. And if it's like the depression and the war, he seems to be suggesting it is, then it's a question of survival. Metaphorically. Here again, though. Survive like how?
Survival of the animal.
Yeah. And with that phrasing, aren't we kind of suggesting that to lose it would be a kind of death to them? They're not literally dead, but what kind of life do they have if they don't, you know? Yeah, I think so. We gotta try to find a way to write some of that down. Oh my God. Yeah, I'm sorry. The question. What are we saying? Their identities as men, is that fair? You guys are like, yeah, sure, whatever.
That's what I was thinking about that.
Okay. I mean, think what I've said there, I've tried very hard to say what you guys were getting at, is like, they would not die literally, but their manhood would die. Is that fair? Okay. We are damn close to a thesis right now. I'm going to review what we have, and then we're going to try to do it. For those keeping score at home, what we have. This is an introduction of the text. Author, title, 2-sentence summary, right? We snuck a little bit of argument in there, right? But it's pretty banal. Sort of like if you read that poem and somebody said, hey, the problems with their lives get highlighted in that game, huh? You'd be like, yeah. So it's fine. Then we get into the roadmap. And we are gesturing toward the paragraphs we are going to come across in our paper, okay? And we highlight the arguments we're going to make, but we don't have the room to really dig into them, okay? But we do make the arguments. Here, they're unable to understand the ramifications. That's an argument, okay? We could go further, but that's fine for now. Our next paragraph, we talk about their home life, how they failed in this like pretty substantial requirement when it comes to these masculine ideals. They failed that one, okay? And they do know it. Pretty hard not to know that one. And then we move to the game itself, where they decide to lose. And again, this is interesting because it's not like they decided to live in white brick houses, to have broken appliances. They didn't ask for that. But in the game, they're like, we are going to lose because we will not lose in a more important way, which is what would happen if they walked. And then we get into all the reasons why. What we're basically coming to is their identities as men is, I would say, pretty damn important for these guys, right? Pretty top shelf. The question is, why? Why is it so important to them? Do you think? We're in a spitball here. We're just, why do they care this much?
It's how they were raised. It's all they've ever known.
Okay, well, why do you think those two things?
Well, it states some of that inside the poem itself.
Yeah. I'm just one, you always have to have at least something in your back pocket because you might have to prove some of this. But I'm with you. I'm not disagreeing. It's my job to be like, yeah, but why? Can you recall even like, you don't have to find the line, but why you think that is? Or if anybody wants to help them out, be fine. The what?
The father dies. So it's showing like some sort of, I guess, wanting of acceptance from their father.
Oh, the idea of being a man in the eyes of their fathers. Yeah. No, all right. Patrilineal. Pass from father to son. Pass from dude to dude. Patrilineal. Yeah, I'll give you that. Especially helps us out with a good line. Very good. And even at the beginning of the poem, our fathers fall in love with their own stories. That allows the implication that it's like our fathers, but then also their fathers and their fathers. Like it's a daddy caterpillar. Part of the image. Okay. Patrilineal. So what? So what? That's the big question. Why does it matter that it goes from father to son, from father to son, from father to son? So what? I ask because there is an answer, by the way. I'm not trying to mess with it. Why do we care? Keep in mind the big question we're trying to answer in our papers. No matter what you write about, in terms of argument, in terms of poem, is always, what does any of this say about us as a people, a society, a culture? Right? If we say all this, and then it really comes, like the stakes are this high in this baseball game, is somehow wrapped up in ideas that these guys get from their dads, and their dads got from their dads, and blah, 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 blah. What does that say about us? How we work or how we think or any of that?
Be accepted.
Yeah. Well, like by our dads, I guess.
Usually our fathers are like the most manly like example that someone can think of.
Yeah.
Like if someone's like, oh, who would you say is like the most masculine person? Usually the first example would be like your father.
Or who teaches you to be a man? Like whatever that means.
And usually that's your father.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, even if it's not biological, like father figure, we would have that term because it's.
Because it may not be like your father, maybe an uncle or something.
Yeah,
But still, it's that father
Yeah.
figure regardless.
for sure. You have to have somebody. In some people's case, it's probably a woman. Like you have to have somebody.
And they don't want to disappoint that person, whoever it may be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a start. So, but all we've really said is that the people teaching you those things are important, both in, like to you, but also I think in terms of the function they perform, right? But we know that. We do know that. So we got to push it a little deeper. This identity is, first of all, patrilineal. I don't know why I have an E there. What does that say about how our society works? That to walk this kid would have been a sin, would have killed their identity as men. We've just said that's passed from fathers to sons. Well, what does that say about us? If we're talking about an idea that gets passed from fathers to sons, that seems pretty central, right? That's pretty much half the population.
We have tradition.
Do I know?
We work with tradition.
Okay. In what way? Come on now. Like, this is the hardest part, by the way. I knew it would be. That's fine. But another way to think of it might be if you were to take everything we just said about it being a sin, about it being a matter of survival in some way, and then you said, yeah, all that gets passed from fathers to sons. Why should I care? How does that apply to me in the society we live
Because it's probably the same way you were raised.
in? In what way? Like, what do you mean?
So they're implying that's probably a cultural thing.
Sure.
And so we're all part of the same culture. And so it would imply that if it's passed from father and son, that you or I were both raised in some regards to that way.
Okay, so let's talk about that. That's all I'm asking you. Okay, like. I can't type. One's way through our culture, forming future generations. We're nearly there. Sentence or two at most, and we're done. We have an argument now, but we've started our thesis. We've said all that stuff we just talked about, we still do it. Is basically what we've done. We need to up the stakes a little bit. So again, I'm going to ask, why do we care that these ideas get passed on? Why do we care? Why does it matter? Do you think? Like, it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. My personal favorite, it can be somewhere in between. But, so what? What does it mean for us that it gets passed like this? That it's foundational to our culture in some way? I think it is. I think I mentioned it last time. I know my dad taught me not to carry an umbrella. You know? And that's a nothing example. But if you make it a metaphor, like Fairchild does with baseball, how many times in my life have I not grabbed an umbrella? You know what I mean? Metaphorically. A lot of people do stuff like that. So, all right, I'm going to ask you a question that I hate. This might help you. Is this good or bad that this gets passed on, these ideas? To not walk mantle here, to lose the game, to win the other, is a matter of survival. Those ideas get passed on. Is that good or bad? Start there.
I think it's good.
Okay. Why?
Big picture, human nature, top of the food chain.
These guys are hardly at that.
They're holding on to their ideas. And at the end of the day, if you get defeated, your ideas are what you really have, or your culture, tradition, and you as like.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Okay. What we can do, we're going to spend the last little bit of the time we have trying to come up with as many as we can. Kept them, this is not the word I want, but we don't have time, stable, like I've kept them upright. Wow. That's one possible argument. That is. Because it is all they have by the end of the poem. That's all they have. I guess you better damn hang on to it. Sure. There's a negative way we can spin it. If the game is a metaphor, and losing at the game enables them to keep their masculinity, have they lost at anything else, possibly, to keep their masculinity? What does keeping their masculinity look like for these guys? What does it look like in their day-to-day? We've done this already, but
Hard work,
go to work,
drink beer.
go get beer, go home and get yelled at. Yeah. But we've kind of said they have to do that. They have to stick to that to keep their masculine identity. Okay. What might change or what might be different for these guys if they allowed themselves to not do that?
What little they have from it.
Yeah, one, and that's this one. Like I said, when you're in the realm of an argument, you have other possibilities. I just want to highlight that for you. We got like a happy one. We're going to get like a negative one just to balance it out. What could their lives look like if they did not strictly adhere to the kind of constraints of these stereotypes? What might they do instead? Do what?
Maybe on a lighter workload.
Lighter workload?
They may be able to work with white collar jobs.
Maybe. Probably not a lot of white collar jobs in that town, so they might
They got to move.
Move location.
they leave. Go elsewhere.
Having
Find other things. What's up?
make a new life.
A new life. If you can go somewhere and have a new life, new prospects, whatever they are, we have a word for that. Starts with an O. Rhymes with some opportunities.
An opportunity.
Right? That's kind of how we think of those things. Couldn't we also argue that the same thing that keeps them upright in this world that is hard limits their opportunities for other things. Like, taking an opportunity is a risk. And sometimes, but it can also work out for you. But they're not allowed that, right? For sure. These are two different arguments, by the way. That's a possible thesis. This other one, that's the other possibility. I think both are legitimate. Now, real quick, just so we don't misunderstand, you would not argue both in a paper, okay? But when you're in the realm of a real argument, I think we are at this point, there's other directions we could go. We're just out of time. That's pretty sunny. That was less so. There's going to be stuff in between. There's going to be stuff we haven't thought of. But these are two pretty solid examples of thesis statements. Okay? And you would speak to one of these throughout the paper with the roadmap that we laid out, right? We have no time, but do you guys have any questions about any of that? Yes.
I think I have potential. That where there's really big paragraph. I mean, that's almost a whole page in a 3-page.
Yeah. The rule of thumb I was always given, an introduction can be about 20% of your paper. About. So, yeah. And look, we could trim some of this. We're drafting. This could be cut down a little bit. But that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
You said those are like thesis.
I think working thesis things, yeah.
So the one at the bottom is 3 sentences. Would that just be considered the whole thesis together, or is
Yeah.
a thesis statement generally just 1 sentence?
Oh, no. No. That's why we call it a statement. Thesis statement, not thesis sentence. Yeah. It'd be a couple sentences.
Can you ask a question within the thesis? So,
If you answer it.
so you have to answer it within the next
For me.
sentence?
Some teachers, and I want to strangle every time I see it, tell you to just ask a question. No. Answer it.
That's how I was taught.
I know. Fuck that person, whoever that was.
At the end, you're supposed to put like a sentence, and then you're supposed to answer it within like the body paragraphs.
My understanding of argument is you're making an argument. You're not. Because if you ask a question, you're writing the argument. It's your job to answer it, not mine. So the paragraphs, yes. But for me, I would ask the question if that helps you, do it. But then do the hard thing, which is answering it. And that's your thesis. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. For next time, and I'll let you go, we have a rough draft. Just do want to turn it in. I've had a couple people email me with issues. I imagine most of you haven't even tried to do it yet. I will try to remind myself to forward you the email I already sent you. But all you go to turnitin.com, you make an account, you sign up with the 2 bits of information I gave you. It's a class ID and a password. Our password is capital M, man stuff, one word. I made it memorable and stupid. The most common issue I see with Turnitin, I got an email the other day, said, it says there's an account with my email address already. This means someone in your schooling at some point made you a Turnitin account. I don't know why people are doing this. But you have a very simple fix. You just click forgot password. Because they're going to send it to that email. Then you fix it. All right. I'll see you guys next week. Thank you.